Welcome to the Growth Over Grades podcast, where we talk about education ideas and topics that matter most to our Spaces educator community. I'm host Melody McAllister, and I want to give a shout out to our Space You're Not community listening in today. Episode 5 involves a conversation with educator and leader Stephanie Morgan Harris, who has fulfilled many roles in education and life. She is currently in the role of principal and always a champion for all students. We recently met her at the Global IB conference in San Diego. Leaders like Stephanie inspire us to form stronger bonds and understand student learning profiles. If we don't navigate this with cultural competence, we do more harm than good with the big ideas such as the portrait of a learner. And they don't actually truly represent our students without that component. This is going to be a powerful conversation today, and I'm so glad you tuned in. If you are not already part of our Facebook community, please join and let's keep the conversation going. Stephanie, how are you today? And can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Hi, I'm doing amazing. I'm honored to be here today to share just a little insight about today's topic. I'm well. I am the proud principal of Kankakee Junior High School in Kankakee, Illinois. I have served in education. This is my 20th year, and I have served in all capacities from being a classroom teacher. I started in rural Selma, Alabama, all the way to now the outer skirts of the city of Chicago and Kankakee. I've done everything from teaching to adjunct professor to assistant principal, dean, and turnaround principal. So I am elated to be here today.
That is wonderful, and you are even outside of your background. You're doing so much. You have a family, and you have such a wide range of abilities in education. I think that's what makes you such a strong leader. So we are so honored to have you here today. And we were talking before the show, and we wanted to make sure that this show really represented, like, we talk about big ideas like the portrait of a learner, and you can't have that without talking about cultural competencies. So that is something that you feel very strongly about. Before we dive into that, and I'm going to put some, if you are like, what is cultural competency? I'm going to put some links out that you can actually help educate yourself a little bit. But remember, Google is your best friend. Before we get started, what is the most important step in building relationships with students?
So the most important, because relationships matter. I tell people this all the time. Relationships matter. So get to know the kid at the core. Get to know your students at the core, their background. As you said, educate yourself on their background, and not be one of those educators that feel like you know more about their background than they know about themselves. But be open to learn from your students. So ask questions. So when you ask those questions, it opens up the world of relationship because it lets them know that you are interested in who they are. So don't assume that all students like rap and hip hop music. That may not be the case. I have a 12-year-old who knows more about 90s R&B than she knows about what's going on in today's culture. So you have to understand that when you ask those questions, it opens that pathway to a vast variety of information or wealth of knowledge about your students.
That's wonderful. Did you have any educators in your life who asked you questions, who got to know you, who you felt like opened that kind of door with you?
Yes, and I had both sides. So I had educators who assumed one thing about me, and then I had educators who actually asked questions, dug deep, and then pulled information from me. And so it's amazing to have both sides of the coin. When I was in elementary school, I had a teacher, Mr. Sutton, and I was one that loved to learn. I'm a learner. Without a teacher, I will still learn.
Mm.
However, he would ask me questions about what I liked and what I didn't like, and he would frame the lesson around those questions that he asked me. So we were learning about, I had already mastered algebra 1 in 7th grade. So he was taking me into geometry, sine, cosine, and tangent. And I was like, yeah, I'm not getting any of this. And then he asked me questions to help make it relevant to me. And then he changed the lesson, which took me deeper into geometry as an 8th grader than I had experienced as a seventh grader. So he was one of those teachers that really wanted to know about me as a learner and what I wanted to discover in learning. Um,
That's amazing. So do you feel like Mr. Sutton, like, it was kind of who opened your eyes to being able to do this for other students? Or how did you like, what made you decide to become an educator?
well, actually, I became an educator out of the opposite. So I had a principal who never took time to get to know me as a student. And I was a student that began to disengage from learning because he never took the time to actually understand me as a student. And I was always a learner of sorts. And so when teachers would not engage me in learning, I would find myself in trouble. I actually had my own seat in the principal's office, but nobody asked the question of why. Why? What's going on with Stephanie that she is now disengaged from learning? Why is Stephanie not learning the way she should learn? Why? And I found myself as a teen mother. I had my oldest son when I was a senior in high school. And my principal said at that time that I wasn't going to be anything but a welfare case. I'll never forget that, because
Dang.
those words were the words that I used to motivate my life to change the trajectory of my path to become an educator, because I wanted to replace principals or educators who felt that way about young people. So that's
That
why I became an educator, because I had a principal who didn't believe in me.
wow. I have no words, but that's such a painful thing to hear. I can't even imagine as a student hearing that, and then being so like, yeah, like, and then being able to turn that around, because most people wouldn't be able to turn that around. So thank you for sharing that. Like, that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Um, so when we talk about, like you said, you had your own seat in the principal's office. You were disengaged. You didn't feel like anybody really knew who you were. And you were strong enough to, like, flip the opposite, but not everybody and not all of our students are able to do that. So that's why it's so important for us to talk about this today. When we talk about, like, the portrait of a learner, or even growth mindset, all of these big ideas can be so
Mhm.
toxic when we're not taking the cultural competencies and putting those in, involving those into those big ideas. So can I ask you, how do cultural competencies, and I always butcher that word, I'm sorry, and identity, how does that lead to student growth?
That's a wonderful question. Cultural competencies and identities, I call them mirrors and windows. When students are able to see themselves in the curriculum, when they're able to see others in the curriculum, and they understand not just time and space as it relates to it right now in the present time, but the historical context of nature related to whatever subject matter it may be, it helps students to see themselves actually succeeding in that content area. And let me go deeper with that. So if I, as a scientist, understand that Lewis Latimer was the architect behind the filament that caused the light bulb to exist, but he never got his accolades behind it, then that helps me as a student realize that I may not always be on the forefront, but I may be pivotal to the change of science. I may be pivotal to the change of mathematics, and I'm able to see myself mastering that content. A lot of students, because they don't see themselves in nature or in relationship to the content area, it doesn't become interesting to them, or they don't understand it, or they don't see how it relates to what they're learning right now. I was that student that always asked that question: what I need to learn this for? Why is this
Mhm.
important to me? Why? How does this connect to me? And a lot of teachers were never really able to understand, how does this really relate to me? So when we talk about identity and competencies, find a way to connect what they're learning to what they're experiencing right now. How does that relate? One of my favorite people in the world often says, you can't teach them unless you reach them. So you have to be able to reach them first to teach them. And that's where that relationship, asking questions, getting those interest-based surveys where you understand what they like and what they don't like, what they're into versus what they're not into. And it helps to bring those competencies into the curriculum.
I love what you're saying. It's so powerful. And you've talked about how you take all of those things, part of the student profile, to help increase the growth of every student. How have you seen that? Um, like take off in your career, like and student, like when you're working with students, how have you seen that um, come across?
So it started when I was in the classroom, actually. I was a teacher that always included the community in the learning in the classroom. So, I would bring in the local fire department, police department. I would bring in local city officials, my friends who were in city government. I would also, from the community, when I was in the suburbs of Chicago, I would bring them into the classroom, and it would help the students to see, well, if me as a student in the classroom can reach and talk to these people right now, then I can actually attain that in my future. And as a teacher, I realized just having those relative conversations about things. For example, I had a lesson, a geographical lesson or a social studies lesson related to city government and politics. And so I said, well, let's take a field trip. And I incorporated all of the components of math and science and social studies into the lesson. And we got on the CTA, we took the city bus downtown Chicago. We walked downtown Chicago to the city hall, and we did a tour of city hall. And then we went back to, took the bus and the train back to school. Now, why is that powerful? Because some of my students had never been on a train before. They had been on a city bus before. They have never seen downtown Chicago or City Hall before. So that was powerful. I took them on that trip so they could understand schedules, how to read the bus schedule, how to read the train schedule, how to know time elapsed. So you're not going to look at the same AM schedule as you do as a PM schedule. Understanding those life skills so that they were able to transfer that into life in the future. So it was taking those opportunities to build upon them as actual uh, citizens, like not
Right.
just students, but as citizens, as comprehensive students. Mhm.
I love that. And a couple of comments have come in, and I just want to read those. And I'm reading them out loud because we also turn this into a podcast so that not everybody can see these comments. But Yolanda, she's also an educator. She shares, as a teacher, it is so important to know the students you are serving. Building relationship is such an important part of helping students be successful. And I know that Yolanda works with young students, so she knows this in a powerful way as well. It starts from day one. And
Yes.
Eric in our community shares, I bet those students never forgot that field trip. I'm sure they didn't.
Yes, and they're actually in college now or graduating college, and they reference that right now as they follow me on Facebook, and they say, Miss, I was Miss Morgan then. They say, well, Miss Morgan was one of those teachers like you would never forget. She had high standards, but she was the most fun. And that's what education is about, is building upon our students' background and building them up. It's like Yolanda said, serving our community, and that's what education is about. It's a service.
Yes, I love that. What resonates with me also as an educator is just that you formed that community and that place, and students were able to see like this is part of my life. And like you said, mirrors and windows, like I can, this is part of who I'm going to be when I grow up or who I am now. And that's so wonderful that you continue those relationships with your students. Although I think that when our students grow up and then they become like adults, it makes us feel so old, but it's worth it.
No, I told them I'm still 21. No.
You look 21, so it all works. It all works out. That's so wonderful. And so we talk about like evidences of learning, especially when we talk about the portrait or the whole picture. We talk about the story of a student and their growth. What do you think is the most important evidence of learning?
So this is a very interesting question, because as a educator, you would think that I would say the grade or academic performance in the grade, right? That's truly not what I feel as the most evidence of learning. I look at application. So how can you use this in your future, your growth, your true growth and understanding? I celebrate students who go from a D to a C just as much as I celebrate somebody that may go from a B to an A. So I remember I had a student who was struggling with reading fluently, and I celebrated the fact that he would only have like 10 words. He could read 10 words in a minute, but I celebrated when he made it to 15 words in a minute. And when I say celebrated, we had a whole ticker tape parade, and everybody knew that it was valuable and important for him because he was struggling. I celebrate the growth, not the grade. Sometimes grades can be skewed based off of
Mhm.
the learning environment. And I give a prime example that relates to me with that. When I was in high school, again, mind you, I was the kid that stayed in the office all of the time. I had my own chair. So my academic performance, or GPA, wasn't as high as others. I wasn't slated to go to college. However, I did. In fact, when I got to college, I didn't feel like I was smart. I actually went to the same school as the valedictorian of another local school, and she had a straight 4.0. But when we both got to college, the difference was I ended up on the dean's list and she didn't, which made me as a teacher question grades. What is the value of a grade? If she had a 4.0 GPA in high school and I didn't, and now I'm in college and I'm thriving and she's not, what really happened? What happened was I used my life experience as a student and those experiences to launch my growth. I grew. Those experiences I learned from those world experiences that helped me to be more successful in college. Whereas when she went to college, she didn't have those same life experiences and she was just all academic, and therefore she wasn't able to be as successful as I was. So it's not always about grades. Sometimes it is more so about that, the application of learning.
True. Do you are you able to share that with your students in a way where they understand? Like, I can only imagine listening to that story as a young person, and maybe even a young person who's had bad experiences themselves, and how that would resonate with them. Has that always, like, do you share your story with your students?
So, yes, I do. I have shared my story with my students at the upper age. I've taught everything from fourth grade to eighth grade in college, and so the middle grades, I do share my story and my life history with them. Now that I'm the principal of a junior high school, I cannot wait for our opening assemblies. Yes, you know, I feel like this is like my sweet spot, my calling, my passion is the junior high age. And so I am excited to be able to share my story with them and help them to understand about knowing that there is a passion and a purpose for your growth and your learning experiences.
Oh, I love that. And I know that the middle schoolers that are, those students that are in your building and your staff that works along with you, they are in for a treat. I'm so excited for you. And I think that's just the best message in this time, probably the most important message in this time. And you and I are both aware of all the stuff that's happening outside in our world
Mhm.
today that makes education so hard, sometimes even more harmful than good. And I just love this bright spot and this light, but you're starting a new journey this year. Am I correct?
Yes. So this
Tell us
so
about that.
So yes, I'm starting as the principal of Kankakee Junior High School. I'm coming from, like I said, I've been all over the across the state of Illinois, but I'm blessed to serve at the junior high school in Kankakee this year. This is my first year in Kankakee, and I'm excited for it. I've done about 4 or 5 years in the junior high setting in Joliet, and so now this will be my first year in Kankakee as the school principal. I have about 600 to 700 students, and I'm just excited about it. Like, and when you talk about, the evidence of learning or
Mhm.
bringing that excitement or that journey back into the school, like I have some major things planned, not just for my students, but for my teachers as well. So I want to celebrate learning and bring that joy back into learning, into that experience, because a lot of our through the course of the pandemic, we have lost that joy, that passion, and we're seeing the effects of it with the teacher shortage. So I'm about, pouring back into our teachers, pouring into our students, because how can they pour out from an empty bucket? So I
Mhm.
just want to fill them up with joy and love and passion and fire. So they're on fire for the first day of school for our students. So
That I love that. That's amazing. I'm here to support that however I can for sure. And the IB program. So that's, we met you at the IB conference. Do you have a lot of experience in the IB program, or is this your first year?
So this is my first year in the IB world, and I'm excited about it. So like the IB world is like, I didn't know that there was people out there that would like me. So like the IB
Mhm.
world is just like me, right? The school that I am leading has an IB program, and I am excited to be the coordinator of that program. So I am excited to this journey and to lead that program and to bring a different lens or perspective about culturally relevance into that program to help our students to see themselves in the learning and to take it across those boundaries and bridges of just the whitewashed curriculum that our students most times experience.
Hmm.
Given that historical frame of and that culturally relevance, because there's a lot of experiences that our students are seeing in the world, and we want to make sure that what we're teaching relates to what they're learning.
Right. Are you seeing, have you, I don't know how long you've been in education, but if your students are in college, then it's been quite a while. And I know you've done a lot of different things. So I can only assume it's been a good, you've seen a lot change. Are you seeing positive changes? Like, do you see more student representation from all different backgrounds in the IB program or in honors programs as you've been teaching?
So, over the course of the 20 years I've been in education, I have seen some transformation in the IB world with the growth of diversity. And I have, like this year, I was so excited that at the IB Global Conference that they made that a highlight. And I was like, yes, 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 and yes, all of the things. They really highlighted the diversity of learners that they showed on stage. They also showed the diversity of learners through the art gallery. They showed the diversity of learners in just every aspect of the IB Global Conference this year. Highlighted different aspects of cultural responsiveness, and so that was a real key component this year. And I really like that they're moving more towards the frame of just looking at it as a global conference and a global society, so that we can take it back into our school settings.
That is so exciting, and I know I have friends, and they're, I'm in my 40s, and that is hasn't been the case for very long. Like, this is something that has changed in the course, even in our education career. So
Yeah.
that is really exciting, and we know that high expectations is one of the biggest components of culture, being culturally responsive and relevant to our students. So I love that, and I love that the IB program is embracing that and showcasing that. That's wonderful news. um, so I am just asking, as a leader, what is one piece of wisdom that you'd like to share with other educators? Maybe it has something to do with what we've been talking about today. Maybe it has something to do with we're going back to school soon. And I know not everybody wants to hear that, so I apologize if that just made you cringe. But what is something that you're passionate about that you'd like to share with other educators?
I want other educators to be unapologetically themselves. Be you.
Mm,
In the last 5 years, it's just become normalized for cultural relevance. I would say has an equity and diversity in the last 5 years has become something that has launched and become a major thing or a major component in education. And so I feel more comfortable now after being in education 20 years, being my authentic self than I've
mhm.
ever felt in education. And so I want to encourage other educators to be unapologetically yourself. Be you. Be you. Shine. Be bright. If you are creative, be creative. If you are not creative, be not creative, but be unapologetically yourself.
For sure. And sometimes we don't even know how creative we are. We're creative in different ways. I love that, and that really resonates with me as well, because I feel like you can't teach a whole child, a whole student, without also embracing yourself as a whole person. And when
Yes.
we open that door for ourselves and we experience that joy, like you were talking about earlier, that's what keeps us going a lot of the times when things feel rough. And it also just shows our students, like, hey, we're not one-dimensional people. There's so
Mhm.
much about us, and there's so much opportunity. The whole child, we could speak about that forever too, and I know that you probably, um, that's something that's important to you as well. So that's an amazing wisdom, piece of wisdom to share. Be authentically yourself. I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry, you want to speak.
Yes, because like how can you, as you said, how can you relate to students if you don't really truly understand who you are or embrace who you are completely? You have to completely embrace who you are and allow yourself the freedom to be yourself in all areas of your life, including the field of education, as you step before students. Because when you embrace who you are, it allows students to show up as themselves and not feel hindered or limited in showing up as themselves. So that's a very key piece for me, is allowing students to show up as themselves, because I allow adults to show up as themselves as well.
That is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And so what is one goal? How will you know? And I didn't prep you with this, so I apologize in advance. How will you know? Because you've got a lot of big ideas for this school year. You want to bring joy back. We know right now there's not a lot of joy happening. How will you know that you've been successful at the end of the school year?
Wow, that is a big question.
Yeah.
Um, I would know that I am successful if I have one kid, one student that says, "Thank you because you made a difference in my life." It just takes one, just one.
Hmm.
Um, I know that yesterday I received a lot of text messages yesterday from staff members and community officials that said, "I am so glad that you are here. You are bringing a fresh breath of fresh air to the community, and we applaud you." And I applaud the Kankakee community for welcoming me to Kankakee Junior High School. And that's just the start. So I just imagine at the end, like right now, I feel fulfilled right now just by giving or shedding my light a little bit. So I feel like I've already accomplished and am successful because I've made others smile. I've made others have bring their fire back and bring their joy back. And I haven't even really got started yet. So it's all
Right?
good from here.
I
It's all
love
good
that.
from here.
I'm so glad because even our leaders, our leaders get dumped on a lot too, and their cups are just as empty as anybody else's. So I'm glad that your cup is filled up. That means that you can pour into your staff and to your students, and you are a leader. And then come full circle to the principal that you had that had no idea who you'd become. Do you still think about that principal a lot and how you are as a leader?
I do actually. And I went back to that school. I went back to my high school 2 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic, and I wanted to see if he was still there, and he wasn't. However, the current principal was there, and I shared my story with him, and he was like mortified. He said, "Oh my God, I can't believe that happened." I said, "It did." And he said, "Well, on behalf of the school community, I apologize to you because that should have
Mhm.
never happened." And that broke me down in tears. I cried literally. He was like, "You don't," I told him, "You said, you don't even understand your apology, even though you weren't the one who did it. Your apology means so much to me because that was a moment in my life that really could have broken me as a student, but it built me as a person." And, I still, communicate with my high school from to this day, but that was very powerful to me to hear the current principal tell me, "I'm sorry on behalf of my previous administration." So that was powerful for me.
Oh gosh. Me too. Me too. I don't really have a lot to say actually. That's a just a great story of healing that we can end on, and just knowing that there is hope for this year. We have all experienced a lot of stuff happening in our world, and we don't even need to name everything right now because you and I, it's happening in our brains as we think about it. So it
Yes.
brings me so much joy that we have leaders like you that are going to be making so many wonderful impacts on students that are going to be our leaders one day, and that there's
Yes.
still healing and there's that opportunity for healing. So I thank you for sharing your story. It's a pretty, I had no idea, and so I don't want you to, I don't take it lightly. Like, that's a powerful story, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing that with us today. And thank you for those who've tuned in, whether it's during the live or the replay. We appreciate your comments so much. You can follow Stephanie. I'm going to pull up her name, uh, her nameplate really quick, and you can follow her on Twitter at All About Kids 8. Are you anywhere else on social media, Stephanie?
I am. I'm on Facebook as Principal Morgan Harris on Facebook, and I think that's it.
Awesome. I will include that in our podcast notes. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for joining in. It was a great chat. And yeah, oh, that was another comment earlier. But yes, thank you so much for being an exemplary leader. We appreciate the time that you took with us today. Everybody, we will see you again on our next episode of Growth Over Grades podcast. Stephanie, don't go away. We're going to talk right after this. Bye, everybody.